Hey everybody, welcome to the Early Days podcast, the show about the hustle, the excitement, the grind, the ups and downs, the success, the failures of building a business from scratch.
Nice, dude. As if you wrote that.
Yeah, I've been repeating it for 1 year now, so I think I had a lot of time to rehearse.
Nice.
But the guest on this episode is Diane, who is the founder of Startup Distillery. Diane works as a consultant to small businesses and startups as well. She goes in and helps them with the problems that they have, preparing them for pitch decks, for example, or their communication strategy, marketing, and a lot of the challenges the small businesses have. It was a very pleasant episode. Diane had a lot of anecdotes to share from her experience. We go deep into some of the main problems startups are having. And all in all, great conversation. A lot of things to get from if you're just starting out or in your year one or year two. If you have a lot of questions about where do you go from, if you're stuck on something, maybe this conversation will help you a little bit.
Yep, I have nothing to add.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcast. Thank you very much for doing that. All the links with the show notes for this episode will be available on our website, wheredulo.com/podcast. Everything that's mentioned there by Diane or us, it's gonna be in there. So go ahead and check it out, wheredulo.com/podcast, and subscribe, like, share our podcast on all your favorite platforms. Thank you.
See you, peeps.
I'm Diane Tarshis, and I am founder and principal of Startup Distillery, which I founded. This is my 19th year, so I founded it in 2000, and I work with startups, helping them deliver or develop effective growth strategies and operating blueprints. So that takes the form of business plans or business model canvases, or companies that have gotten stuck and they've plateaued and they need help getting unstuck and growing. Companies that need to raise funds and pitch. A whole host of services around early stage growth companies.
Yeah, I think this actually how we connected. I remember is I saw you on the Twitter thread about somebody who just had a meeting with startup founder. It was on the topic around funding, whether they should go with the VC funding or bootstrapping. It's actually something we can touch on later in the conversation as well. But I'm curious, when you mentioned year 2000, is that somewhere around the .com boom and
bust? Right. I've been through a couple of cycles, so I have a nice perspective. So I mean, personally, this was just, I founded the company based on personal reasons. So my background is one where when I was in college, I started doing small business consulting. I went to the Wharton School, and they had, at the University of Pennsylvania, and they had a research center that was a joint venture between the U.S. Small Business Administration, so the SBA, and they were testing out this new model, working with universities or partnering with universities. The idea was to bring students together with local business owners and to really combine the best of both worlds. So the students' theoretical knowledge along with the client's practical industry-specific knowledge.
Right.
And so that's how I got into it. But when I graduated, I worked on Wall Street. I was an investment banker. I ended up moving from New York to Chicago, worked in operations, manufacturing, and then got married, started a family, wanted to have something more flexible. And the timing happened to be 2000 when I was like, okay, I'm ready to do this. So that's how that happened.
And I'm curious, how did you approach your very first clients? Were you on a personal network, or did you just start from the very beginning, building up from zero?
Well, you have to remember that. So 2000, the internet really wasn't. It was very new, and so I certainly started from my personal network. So a friend of my sister's was trying to launch a business. I also had a neighbor who was trying to launch a business, and so that's how I got started. The third client was what I would call my real client, my first real client. Somebody I didn't know, somebody not even in Chicago. Well, my sister's friend was in San Francisco. My first client was based in Boston. So it was really just emailing things back and forth and talking on the phone. I learned my first pricing lesson because I did a custom business plan, and he was an amazing client and turned out great, and they got funding, etc. But right after the business plan was finished, he and his partner sent me this humongous bouquet of flowers. And my husband looked at me when he came home and he said, "You didn't charge enough." He said, "If they could afford to buy you that kind of bouquet of flowers, you didn't charge enough." So I adjusted my prices accordingly.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. The interesting topic as well. How did you get the confidence to charge higher the next time? Did you went through an experimental period where you were testing out different options?
Yes, always. And you're always tweaking. But going through the process, it was very labor intensive. And so between that and really taking, believe it or not, what my husband said to heart, I really sort of did this calculation. I also did a lot of my own, research in terms of what are other people charging. I think that's always a good exercise and something I advise my clients to do, get a sense of what the market will bear. What are other people charging? What do they include in that price? So whether it's a product or a service, because you may be offering more or less, or something that's more valuable or less valuable, and you should really adjust your pricing accordingly. As I say all of this, I start thinking about I had a client of mine that was product focused, and what I run into with a lot of my clients is when they're trying to develop their pricing, it's not only what the market will bear and the sort of value model, but it's also really taking a careful look at the elements that are going into the product. So, for example, this client was developing luxury leather goods, accessories for women primarily, and they weren't including all of the material expenses. They had never put together a spreadsheet to see how much the rivets were, how much the labor was for the fancy stitching, how much the suede interiors were. I mean, they really needed to break everything down, and they didn't do that. And that's sort of a classic story that I run into, whether it's a client or just somebody I run into otherwise, where they're not taking into account all of the expenses involved. And if they do that ahead of time, they could see whether they're going to be making or losing money in the end. So, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, because we went through kind of the same process, because we take a lot of materials and then we assemble that into one shirt. Well, you always look at the total cost. I mean, I don't know how you would ignore kind of everything that goes into the price. But you mentioned some common I guess problems. What are some of the most common sticking points or hurdles that you see companies get stuck on, especially maybe in the beginning stages?
Oh boy. Can you narrow that down a little?
Well, let's say when they launch, there's usually like they've built up an audience and there's like people expecting a product. Then at some point you exhaust those people, and there's kind of a flat line. So at that point, I think it's very critical. Some people might get discouraged. Some people might push through it.
Right.
What do you see kind of the common, just some common, aspects of, I guess, of the flat line?
Well, so here's where I'm a little bit of an outlier, because I handle a launch apparently very differently than most. because when I'm working with someone, okay, so I'm going to make a generalization here. And I'm going to sound a little ageist. So when I'm working with clients in their 20s, they just want to, as I say, go off half-cocked. So they want to get started, hit the ground running, and they'll figure things out as they go along. My clients in their 30s on up tend to have a little more experience under their belts and realize that it's better to, there used to be this commercial in the US about, you can pay me now or you can pay me later, about oil filters for your car. But, they understand the importance of sort of front loading the homework, so to speak. So, so I try to make sure that there's a roadmap from the very beginning so that they don't stall out and get stuck. So the whole idea is to say, okay, what's my target audience? Who are what are my customer segments? Who am I going after? Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. How am I planning to reach them? Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, based on traction and the reception that they're getting, based on the growth that they're seeing, because it may be that they grow in different areas that they didn't predict, and so they need to do a shift of resources and focus. Maybe I had a client who developed a medical device, and they were originally going after the private sector, but then it turns out that the military was interested, and that was a better focus. And so you have to have this sort of general framework to work within, and then plan, okay, when I am hitting this benchmark, I can spend more money to do this kind of marketing in this kind of way, or it's time for me to raise more funds so that I can do that. So I tend to prepare them so they're not stalling out, which is
right.
That's my philosophy. Instead of having to, spin your wheels and waste time and money. So.
But what happens when things don't go according to plan? Because this is in a real,
all the time.
You mentioned one example where the company needed to change their direction a little bit to a different type of customer. How do you work with those clients? Because it can be quite challenging. Maybe they're really set in their ways and really passionate about pursuing their direct-to-consumer strategy, but maybe in this case, as you say, the other party was much better fit.
I always feel like I'm stubborn in certain ways, and so I feel like there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so when I run into a client that doesn't know, hang on, I'm going to actually bring up. I want to bring up a list. I need to jog my memory as to who. I know I've got clients that are going to bring up good stories here. Here we go. Because it's like showing versus telling. So I'm going down my list here. I was just talking to a former client of mine. He wanted to develop these community music centers that offer, band space, space for bands to practice, and then to have a school to teach instrument lessons to kids and adults. This whole sort of music communal thing that he could develop and then grow in multiple locations. And so he's been trying to raise funds, and I am not a fund. A resource for funding. And I have maybe a few connections, but it's not a service I provide. But he needed to brainstorm, and he's not getting the response that everyone loves his idea. Everyone thinks it's great. Everyone thinks it's going to work, but nobody's feeling the passion. And he's not finding that one person that feels the same way he does. And so to me, all of this is about brainstorming. And so I'm like, okay, well, so let's shift from the private fundraising model to, let's think about grants. So, you're offering community-based services here that counties, cities, states feel strongly about early education for kids, et cetera. There have to be grants, at these various levels that you can go after and apply for that may help meet the gap. Because there's a bank that's interested in loaning him half of what he needs. He needs to raise the other half. So, there's always another way to solve the problem. If you're not reaching people through a social marketing, a social media marketing plan, then maybe you need to think more grassroots. Maybe you need to start at a more local level of if it's a retail shop and offering programming on the weekends to bring in families where there's a story reading sort of hour every morning to bring in families, or get involved in the community in terms of neighborhood associations, or I don't know, there, depending on the business, there's always a way. It's just a matter, to me, of brainstorming ideas. And the other piece that I find is the more you talk about your business to people, the more you sort of seem to stumble across new ideas. I always sort of wonder if it's always out there and you're just tuned in because you're talking about it, or whether talking about it sort of brings everything to you. But I don't know. Sort of babbling, but.
So while we're on the topic of funding, how do you think about self-funding or looking for capital? Because it seems like it's very popular now to start a business right off the bat, get funding. That's kind of the first thing to tackle. We went the other route for personal reasons. But how are you thinking about it? Is it black or white? Are there some cases where you actually need funding, or is it maybe something that you need to do down the line? How do you think about the whole topic?
Well, you hit upon one of my pet peeves. So you did it the way I like. So in fact, the tweet that probably caught your attention is me sort of semi-ranting on Twitter, because it drives me crazy when companies think that they need to raise money right away. And also, I think there's too much of this feeling of the end goal is to raise money, as opposed to the end goal being to build a growing, profitable, thriving business. So I personally am frequently anti-VC because maybe it's because I'm a control freak, and I think every founder should be. Or I assume that every founder wants to be. But to me, the ideal situation is to bootstrap as long as you can, or get money from friends and family, who can be very forgiving oftentimes, not always. And the more traction you can get, the more you can build your business using your own resources, certainly the more control you have. And then when the time comes when you do decide that you want to raise money, you are in a stronger negotiating position. So when you're starting out, you have nothing to show other than an idea, and you are essentially, standing there hat in hand, begging for money. But when you have something to show, something tangible, and you've got substantial proof that you've got something with legs, then you hold the cards and you can negotiate from a position of strength. And then you can be careful about who you partner with, and make sure that your personalities align, that your goals align. One of the problems that I have with venture money is that their goals are really not aligned with most founders. They want to get in make a lot of money, and get out or have your company sold. And a lot of founders that I work with, not all of them, but a lot of them don't really want that. You know, it's their baby. And so they want to see it through. So, so I'm a fan of bootstrapping as long as you can, and then negotiating from a position of strength to raise money. So
what do you think about the argument, and we hear it a lot as well because of our situation and our choices, is that people say, because while we're self-funding the company as well, we still have also day jobs that are actually supporting the bills and everything else, so we can focus the rest of the time on building the business.
Smart, very smart.
When we talk with some people, they sometimes say, yeah, but if you're not 100% dedicated, then you're not necessarily moving in the right way or in the right direction. What do you think about this argument? I'm quite curious.
Nonsense. You know, first of all, who are they to judge? You know, that's my reaction. What do they know? And I'm sure you've experienced this as founders, but you'll run across so many people who will say, you can't, you shouldn't, don't, it won't work. I mean, you know, if everybody listened to the naysayers, nothing would get created and nothing would get done. I mean, you know, there'd be no innovation. So, yeah, in a word, nonsense. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% to that as well. Also, because we can prove it from experience as well. It doesn't feel worse. Actually, it feels really good as well. It gives us a lot of freedom. That's one thing I think it notices. It kind of, you don't have to do rush decisions in this case.
I think that is key. You know, you're doing everything the way I like people to do it. So
from an external side.
It's so refreshing because what your philosophy and what you're doing is rare. Most people really, I think in a short-term way, and you guys are clearly thinking long-term. Not only long-term, but so you're trying to build, it sounds like, wisely and for long-term success, but also thinking about your balancing with your personal lives, because you know, the stress of having, you know, everything in the company when you're trying to put food on the table is, you know, then it becomes all consuming, and then that's not really a healthy lifestyle for the long term. So I try to encourage entrepreneurs to you know, do the side hustle, and really I can't emphasize enough the value I find in self-funding for as long as you can, because exactly what you said, it gives you freedom. I want to say there's less stress. It's just that it's different stress, because I'm sure balancing is a challenge. But yeah, you're masters of your destiny. So to me, that's what it's about.
Yeah, on the stress topic, I think you touched on it really nicely. Because usually there's a kind of an annotation that if you're building a business, it should be really stressful, like everything's really, you're struggling really. But we never felt that during the whole, 2 years of building it, because there's always, I mean, financially we are okay, even if the business, let's say fails, whatever happens, we just had some savings put in the business. I mean, so worst case scenario is not that bad in theory, but there's also there's no stress of actually building it. So you're taking your time. And also, I think building it on the side, you know that you have, let's say, 2 hours to spend on the business today. For example, let's say we work until 6, and then we say we have 2 hours to spend on an evening. And then you kind of prioritize the most important things for those 2 hours. Otherwise, if you have the whole day, I wouldn't be as productive, I don't think.
That's actually a good point. Interestingly, I am starting another business, this time with a partner that's related to my current business. So she's a teacher. I started out mentoring this high school class, teaching social entrepreneurship. And I have a product that I sell. It's a DIY, do-it-yourself business plan kit, ebook, templates, worksheets, for people that can't afford my one-on-one services. And I adapted it for the classroom so that it ends up being a digital textbook. And I sold it to another school. And I was observing the class, and the teacher was teaching it like an MBA course, and it was driving me crazy. And so I'm like, no, we need to really teach educators how to teach this class. And she and I have been teaching it the way I would want to see it taught. And so we're starting this workshop to teach educators how to teach entrepreneurship. So long story short, we are experiencing what you are, which is we've got limited time. She's got a full-time job. I've got my job. We've got plenty going on. And so we've got these very defined pockets of time when we can get work done on developing, the workshop and that business. So it does keep you focused. I can vouch for that. I think the other thing too is when you keep your day job, I think it just reduces your stress because you have your day job. It's not like your life is hanging in the balance. So, I think it helps you. I can't, it's just so rare. So many people are in such a rush. And so the fact that you're taking your time with your business, I have a client now, somebody who bought this business plan kit, and she was feeling all this pressure to hurry up. And I was like, what's the rush? Why? Is there a deadline? She was like, well, no. And I'm like, okay, so be thoughtful in what you're doing. There's nobody that's saying you have to do this by a certain date. So, build out your plan, build out your roadmap, and then you'll just chip away at it. So, has that, I'm curious about the two of you. So you've been building your business for 2 years.
Yeah.
And so,
so we started, oh yeah, sorry.
Well, I want to know, like, where are you now?
So when we started, initially was in the end of 2017, when the idea was born, and we actually started, took a little time to validate it first, to see if we're still excited after a couple of months. Then we did all the research to try to find a manufacturing partner to learn about the industry, because both of us actually come from the software world.
Okay.
We are still in the development world, actually, by day. That's our day job still.
Oh, okay.
No connection to the fashion or clothing manufacturing world whatsoever. So we knew, I think how we approached it was also with the very engineering mindset or software engineering mindset that, you don't have to build anything from zero, from scratch. In development, you use software that's already available, and you pick and choose stuff from different parts and just combine them in your own unique way.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we did. We found somebody who could help us with a lot of experience in the manufacturing side with all the contacts. We were also a bit fortunate in that, but I mean, we took out the list of all the possible contacts we could find, and we've decided from the beginning to manufacture in Bulgaria, where we are originally from, because the country has big traditions in manufacturing, but because also we kind of want to have something that stands out nicely as something that was born in our country as well. Like eventually, if it grows, it's a nice commercial as well. Like something that's happening, even though we are based in Amsterdam. But the name DULO, that comes from an old Bulgarian clan that actually started the country as well. So it has a little bit of
really?
that.
Okay.
And then basically, once we found this person who we trusted with the manufacturing, we started a process of product development, which took us about 10 months. And as we were testing fabrics, different models, eventually we ordered 100 meters of fabric. We made 3 batches of around 20 shirts. We did one batch first with friends and family. We gave them away. We collected feedback quickly. Then the second one was to expand to a broader audience of people who we don't know, so we'll get more honest feedback as well, because there's always a danger of people being too nice.
Right.
And then we did a lot of minor changes and adjustments in the last batches. And kind of we spent the first year behind the scenes in development and production while still documenting this whole process. So our main strategy to this day is to document the journey of building the business, which is really nice because it allows us to also for us to reflect. Again, we're
That's
doing
nice.
this, and even if it doesn't attract the most reads or the biggest audience, for us it's super useful and super important, because if we now end up debating something, we can just say, hey, let's look at that because we did the same thing 1 year ago.
Right.
That's what we're thinking, that's how what we did, and that's what we learned from it. Let's not repeat the same mistake.
Right.
And then about 14 months ago, we opened actually for business, our online shop. And as Julian mentioned from the very beginning, because we had this year in development, we had an audience of people who knew about us. They became our first customers. We were super excited. Very nice, strong month. It's a great success. And then we launched in November, end of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was born actually in 2016. So the journey starts in 2016.
Okay.
November 2017, we launched the website. Great first month. And then we see in December, almost quiet, nothing happens.
Crickets.
We start to freak out, say, is the website bad? What happened here? Of course, us being programmers, the easiest thing for us is to change the website. And we started tweaking things around a little bit. Then things started to pick up, but quite slowly. And then we figured out actually that this is something a lot of startups are facing always. They have a launch because they have generated some buzz. They have people who know about them. Then they reach.
Yeah. You have to develop the long-term plan, right? Not the grand opening only.
And we didn't even think of the launch. We were always thinking long-term, but it just happened this way. But we never realized how much work it is to build a brand. And I have a background in marketing. I studied marketing. I worked in marketing. But until building something with our own limited resources and just by ourselves with our hands, we figured out that it's quite difficult. And
it is.
Things that go around with it as well. And then the whole year was a lot of learnings. Again, something good happens. We get 5% great reactions. We're really fired up. Then 95% of the boring work kicks in, and you being punched in the face and all that when you're learning stuff on your own a little bit. But again, because we have this security and freedom to experiment, and we're not rushed because we have our day jobs, we never got freaked out. We just say, okay, how can we improve small things? And even to this day, we're still fixing small things that, if you're a more serious operation, I guess you would have from the very beginning in an ideal world. But,
it depends. So I want to go back to one of your earlier questions when you were asking about, what do you do when you sort of plateau, which is what you're talking about. So just to give you an example, what I do with clients is I say, okay, so you're trying to reach these certain people. And I'm a big believer in thinking in terms of customer personas. So really sort of taking an empathic view of putting yourself in your customer's shoes. And I have this weird ability to, I guess I think of it as synthesizing, but sort of seeing patterns and connections. So I think, okay, you're selling men's shirts. I know somebody else who's selling men's socks. There are companies out there that are selling men's clothing or men's accessories that have a big presence. Can you partner with them and run some sort of promotional kind of partnership type strategy? I think about my son is your target audience. He's in his first postgraduate job. He's in Manhattan with in New York with a bunch of other, new professionals. There's a lot of word of mouth where they want performance and value, and they have a budget. And I don't remember how much your shirts are. How How much are your shirts in US dollars?
I think they're around $100.
Right. So the fact that they have all of these features that would be so appealing to that demographic, and if they, I don't know if they're, I can't remember, are they moisture wicking too or not, or I'm breathable?
Exactly, they're very breathable, but
Breathable. Okay.
wicking
Still
you.
perfect. So you get in with some of them, and so, you know, there's the whole word of mouth process, but then there are partnerships that you could try to develop with some employers where they've got, you know, these new, you know, every year they hire these batches of new grads. They know they need to develop their wardrobes. And, you know, so what if there were some kind of something or other during the training period? There's some sort of promotion. I mean, so this is the kind of brainstorming that goes on where I'll throw out ideas and you're like, yeah, no, Diane. Or, oh, you know, or you may say something about why you don't like my suggestion that will make me think of something else, or that I'm saying something that makes you think of a new idea. And that's how the ideas come about, because, you know, I've had experience for, okay, I guess 30 something years in all these disciplines. You know, so manufacturing, operations, you know, retailing, you name it, finance, as well as life experience. So, you know, I've seen all these different kinds of companies and how they've sort of figured out how to get over the hump, etc. So, so there are lots of ideas coming to mind for you.
I think it's been quite an interesting process, because we usually, in the beginning, I think we got stuck into the idea of just creating a lot of content, and then like the business is going to pick up from there. And then we kind of have a slow month, and then we start thinking about new things, and then for some reason, just like the month gets better, and I say, okay, we're doing fine the way we're doing it. So we don't kind of go into new options. But I think partnerships and yeah, a lot of other things that we actually need to start doing, instead of, you know, just sitting behind the computers and trying to do it that way. But going back to when you started, did you find it easier after, let's say, the first business that you helped reach like a solid, you know, point? Did you find it easier applying those lessons in the ones that followed, or do you find the context very different from one another?
No, so the lessons, I guess my philosophy is that I'm bringing sort of standard business principles, and my varied experience, which is pretty unusual experience, to, well, let me take a step back. So the whole idea is that I work collaboratively with my clients. So I'm not dictating. I'm not saying, oh, I know everything. And here's this formula, and here are all the answers. This is how you do it. That's not what I do. And that would be pretty boring. So the whole idea is to really work collaboratively, and my clients bring their passion and knowledge and hopefully industry knowledge to the table. And I bring my business experience, which is really, I want to say, multimodal, you know, understanding about the customer experience. I am constantly acting as devil's advocate. I was brought up, I'm the daughter of a department store retailer. I have a high sensitivity to what customer experience should look like and how to think like a customer. And then sort of I was a finance major, and so understanding the financial implications to everything. And then I'm sort of a geek, and so I you know, have my tech head tendencies, and I like to know how things work. And so so it's really a matter of bringing everything together, and that's why I say I'm industry agnostic. Really doesn't matter what. I don't specialize in an industry. I love learning about new industries. And for me, a lot of what's involved in building a business is not only being able to understand your customer, but to be able to speak to them. And whether your customer is a venture capitalist because you're trying to raise funds, or whether it's the customer that's walking in the store or going to your website, or whether your customer is, frankly, your employees, that you're trying to hire employees, you really need to think about your there are all of these types of audiences. You have to know how to reach them, how to talk to them. And so to me, the more technical my clients' business is, the more fun I think it is, because I have to make them explain it in layman's terms, and I am able to then translate it into plain English so that other people understand.
Yeah, that's something actually very interesting. Again, coming from our backgrounds as well, I think being in the tech industry, this product that we created is basically a product that solves our own problem. That's how it started. We both like wearing dress shirts, but you probably know in the tech world, the standard is a hoodie and a t-shirt. It's not very common. But one of the main reasons is because I think like programmers in particular are very pragmatic type, and they don't want to take care of all the hassle and all that. But we're not exactly natural coders who stumbled into it after university and after some professional career already. We just saw an opportunity and decided to go in it. And that's why we kept this desire to wear dress shirts from time to time. It's just nicer, looks nicer, and I think people perceive it differently. And it came from this need for us to not waste 15 minutes every morning ironing, not feeling super constricted in a traditional tight shirt. But we ended up with a very technical product as well, that when we first started to describe, it was sounding a lot like we're just explaining features. It's this and that and that, A, B, C, D. We come up with this list that we learned that eventually apparently doesn't resonate with people, that they don't find it that exciting, even though for us this is like, wow, this is super cool. It's the best shirt that you can ever have, right? I think it's super interesting how, and it's actually quite difficult as well. How do you translate this something more that resonates emotionally with the audience? What do you look for to maybe you can give some tips to other founders who are facing so similar problems, like what do you do to kind of translate these technical specification specs, something that's understandable, more like a target. That's another thing, I think. Some founders make a mistake in the
I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a connection issue, so I apologize if I'm like looking elsewhere on my screen, because I don't know if it's happening at your end or if it's just me. Hang on just a second. I did catch what you were saying, though.
Yeah, we just got a little bit of luck on your side, but I think now it's fine and we're all
okay. Hopefully. Okay, sorry.
Was when you have this, let's say, a more technical product or you're building software, how do you communicate to your target group who is not necessarily the same people as you or that knowledgeable as you?
Right.
Let's say you're in a software business, marketing, automation, or anything. You're not talking to the developer, you're talking to the marketer. Totally different person.
Right. Well, I talk to my clients about needing to appeal to the head and the heart. So, there's the logical part of your brain of, oh, yes, these features are what I need. But there needs to be some sort of emotional connection too. Like, oh my God, this is going to make my life so much easier. You want to really get them there. And this is a little bit about what I was talking about with your website when I was making those comments. I'm like, I can tell this is a great product, but there's too much interference going on, and it's not speaking directly to me as the customer. It was like, here I am, the customer. It was talking over there a little. It was just a little off focus. And so it is a matter of whether you do that through through focus groups and talking to existing customers who will be honest with you, or whether it's, you know, working with an experienced professional, or whether it is trial and error, whatever it is, you know, you need to, you know, I mean, I only know how I do it, which is, you know what, I just can look at something and I can see it's missing the mark. Here's why. This is what I would do. And I'm constantly tweaking things so that it is, in fact, here's an example. So I drive my clients crazy when they're putting together pitch decks, because I'm like, nope, fewer words, fewer words, fewer words, use bullets, not complete sentences. You want there are these things that you know, you need to connect with the audience. You don't want them looking at the slides. You want them looking at you. The slides are just a placeholder, and you need to get to the point, and you can't ramble, and you need to make eye contact, and you need to, the whole reason I came up with my business name is you need to distill, distill, distill. You need to distill it down so that you are getting the point across clearly and succinctly. And that is the story. That's the name of the game. So if I've got a client who, I remember I think my favorite client to date was a biofuels manufacturer. And I remember, this is a guy who works for Shell. He was in Amsterdam, actually, and then in Alabama, but he's a Dutch national. And he came to me, and I didn't know anything about biofuels. So I'm like, okay, you know, explain it to me. And I learned about feedstock, and that sugarcane could be a great feedstock, and, you know, all this technical stuff. And it was a matter of explaining it in plain English and just really succinctly, so that and telling that story. You know, everything's a fairy tale with the startup, meaning, you know, there's this problem, the quote unquote damsel in distress, and then the startup comes in and saves the day, you know, is the hero. And so you need to sort of take the audience on that journey, at least when you're raising funds. And so it's a matter of being able to explain that in the way that people can understand. So in plain English, and in words that laymen understand. For the customer, it's a matter of speaking to them in terms of their daily lives. So thinking about the pain point. And yeah, I've got a kid who I know will spend a little more on shirts that will last longer, be more comfortable, won't require any ironing, that look nice, that fit him nicely. The fact that he doesn't have to iron them sounds awesome. And he and his friends will be totally into it. So, you know, you got to speak to that, not droning on about how they're manufactured, or, you know, the history of the fabric, or I don't know, whatever else.
Yeah, for sure. Those are things usually that people, if they're that interested, they always find, you can always tell it in somewhere on the side as a side note, or if they ask you, then you tell the story.
Exactly.
Because it's actually very easy to distract people and confuse the message that you want to communicate.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Diane, it's I think we're nearing the hour as well. I want to spend some time on tell us a little bit about your future plans and future projects that are coming in the next half a year to a year. I'm really curious about that.
Well, I never know what future projects are coming, because it's a matter of somebody picking up the phone and saying help. So who knows? That's kind of the fun of it. And in terms of future projects, well, you know, so there's this teaching workshop thing that I was telling you about. So I guess about 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, my kids' school started teaching a social entrepreneurship class in the high school. And I always wore my professional hat and my parent hat separately. So no one at school knew that I, did this work professionally. But there was a newsletter that talked about their culminating project being a pitch night. And I went and I observed, and I was jumping out of my skin saying, okay, this is a history teacher teaching this course. This isn't really going quite right. Got involved, mentored. Anyway, ended up here today. And so this other teacher and I are developing this workshop to teach educators how you teach entrepreneurship, which is a very hands-on, collaborative kind of experience. So we connect with startups here in the local area. They bring real problems to the students, and it is absolutely amazing how these students come up with real, actionable, valuable solutions for these businesses. I mean, it is mind-blowing to me. So we had 2 companies this past semester. They both walked out stunned, saying, holy cow, we're actually going to do these things. So we want other schools to teach this and to teach it in a way that's meaningful for students, not only if they want to become entrepreneurs, but so that they can think in this way, even if they work for a Fortune 500 company, so that they can think about innovation and speaking to their customers and addressing pain points and thinking in terms of the problem solution framework. So to me, that's my exciting project that I know about. So
it sounds very exciting here. It's we had some experiences working with students in universities here. In the Netherlands, there's 2 types of universities: academic and more practice-oriented universities.
Mhm.
Practical universities, applied sciences. And we got to do a couple of student projects, and it's really amazing what they can do. But I think it's very important to work with the teachers as well to guide them in the right way, because what I've noticed as well is that a lot of them are just following a curriculum that's not really relevant or applicable. And when you're talking especially about startups, everything is so dynamic that you should have as less constraints as possible.
Well, yes. Although I always say it's better to have a framework that you're working within. And then, so I'm a big believer in business plans in whatever form it takes, whether it's just a canvas or a full-fledged thing, whatever it is, that's the foundation. And then when you've got that foundation, you're able to make better decisions, whatever they are. Because, you were saying it before. I mean, building a business is a dynamic process. It evolves. Julian, you were asking me before about, the experience with clients and, how, if they're the same or not. And, each one evolves completely differently because it's just a completely organic process. But when you've got this foundation, then you're able to say, yes, that partnership makes sense, or no, I'm not interested in selling the business right now, or no, I really don't want to take that outside funding, for this reason or that reason, because you've thought about these issues ahead of time, as opposed to, having to sort of immediately react, having no framework or frame of reference. So I don't know, but we'll have to talk, and then I can share my digital textbook with you, and maybe when the workshop after this summer's maiden voyage of the workshop, then we could talk about that too.
Where to find out more about you and your work, the workshop, the ebook, and everything that you mentioned so far, now is the time to make sure you share them, and we will include them in the show notes as well, so people can have it, check them out immediately.
Well, everyone can go to startupdistillery.com And that's where you can learn all about me and my company and what I do. And then there is a page on there that's in the navigation bar for educators, and that talks about the textbook for the entrepreneurship class. And coming soon will be a page about the workshop. So
Twitter handle?
Startup Distiller without the E. Yeah.
Make sure folks you follow Diane there, because I think she has some very nice things to share.
Yeah.
Even in short tweet format.
Thank you both.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Diane.
Thanks for coming.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for the time and for everything.